The letter arrived in a thick cream envelope, sealed with a wax crest Amelia Northwood hadn't seen in 20 years, the sigil of Blackstone. The Northwood family estate. She almost didn't open it. But grief does strange things to people. And since the death of her estranged father 3 weeks earlier, Amelia had felt unmoored. Like her entire past had come untethered. She slit the envelope with the corner of a credit card and read, "You are hereby requested to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Edward Northwood, to be held at Blackstone Hall, Wiltshire, on the 14th of May, 11 a.m. Below that, in tight scrawl, was a note not written by any solicitor. "It's not just money. There's something you must see, E." Amelia stared at the note. E? Her father's name was Edward. But he'd never signed a letter that way. Not to her. In fact, he hadn't written her anything since she was 14. The letter dropped from her hand. Blackstone Hall. It wasn't just a house. It was where she was born. Where her mother died. Where her father vanished into shadows even before he was buried 6 feet under. Amelia booked the train ticket before she could talk herself out of it. The train ride to Wiltshire passed in a blur of blurred hedgerows and rain-slick windows. Amelia hadn't been back to the countryside in years, not since university. And certainly not to Blackstone. The car that met her at the station was old but polished. The driver, a gaunt man named Mercer, greeted her with a nod. "Miss Northwood," he said. "Welcome back." She didn't correct him. She hadn't been a Northwood for years. She'd shed that name when she left at 16, and had never looked back. Still, there was something oddly grounding about hearing it spoken aloud again. The ride to Blackstone was slow, winding through a labyrinth of hedgerows and pale fog. A deer bounded across the road at one point, startled by the headlights. Mercer said nothing. Then, it appeared Blackstone Hall. It hadn't changed. Ivy still draped over the stonework like a widow's veil. The weathered gargoyles atop the roof still leered down with ancient malice. The circular drive crunched beneath the tires as they came to a halt. "You'll find your room as you left it," Mercer said cryptically, then drove off without waiting for a reply. Amelia stood before the great wooden doors. A part of her, absurdly, expected them to open on their own. They didn't. Inside, the house exhaled the chill of long-held breath. The air smelled of lavender and iron exactly as she remembered. She could almost hear her mother humming in the parlor, see her younger self tumbling down the staircase, chased by shadows only she believed in. She passed the portraits in the foyer generations of Northwoods, stern faces, cold eyes, and at the very end, her father, Edward Northwood, still watching her, even in death. At 11 sharp, she entered the study. The solicitor, Mr. Pritchard, was already there. He looked vaguely like a crow-dark suit, sharp nose, and a gleam of intelligence too sharp to trust. "Miss Northwood, thank you for coming," he said, motioning to a chair. She sat. The room creaked in protest. "We'll proceed formally," he said, opening a leather case. Edward Northwood's final will and testament is straightforward, save for one clause. Amelia's fingers curled in her lap. "He left everything to you. The house, the lands, the accounts." She blinked. "Everything?" "Yes. However, there's a stipulation." He adjusted his glasses. "You must remain here, in Blackstone Hall, for 7 nights. Without interruption. After the 7th night, the full inheritance passes to you." "Why?" she asked. "Your father wrote only, 'She must understand, the house will show her.'" Pritchard laid out a parchment. "If you agree, I'll need your signature." Amelia hesitated, then signed. The pen barely left the page when the great hallway clock struck 11. Deep and sonorous, the chimes rang out. 11. And then 12. The house had awakened. The first night passed quietly. Mostly. Amelia found her old room untouched. Pink walls, faded posters of 90s pop stars, and a cracked music box that played a warped lullaby when she wound it. She left her suitcase on the floor and wandered the halls. The staff was gone. No cooks, no maids. Only Mercer, silent as ever, prepared a bland dinner and vanished into the shadows afterward. The electricity worked, but the lights flickered constantly. The hallway sconces burned with wax candles that smelled faintly of roses. That night, she dreamed of footsteps outside her door. When she opened it, there was nothing, except a single feather, black, long, laid perfectly across the threshold. Day 2 brought rain. She found herself pacing the library, flipping through old journals and ledgers. Edward's handwriting filled the margins of every book. Notes in Latin, symbols she didn't recognize, drawings of the house floor plans but with rooms that didn't exist. At noon, she found a door she didn't remember. The attic. It wasn't locked. But when she turned the handle, something pushed back. As if someone or something stood on the other side. She stepped back. By evening, the door was gone. In its place, smooth wall. She didn't sleep well. Day 3, she explored the east wing, a part of the house that had been off-limits during her childhood. She found a child's nursery. Crib still intact. A dollhouse version of Blackstone Hall sat in the corner, too realistic. Inside the dollhouse was a miniature figure. Of her. Same clothes, same hair. The doll's eyes had been removed. By day 4, she began to hear the whispers, always just behind her. Always just out of reach. They spoke in a language she half understood, like half-remembered lullabies from childhood. That night, her window opened itself. Rain poured in. On the floor, another feather. This one white. Day 5, Amelia found a sealed envelope in her father's study. It was addressed to her. Inside, a single page. The house is not cursed. It is hungry. We fed it for centuries. I tried to stop it. Failed. If you stay, it will claim you. But if you understand it, you may end it. No signature. Only the sigil of Blackstone stamped in red. That night, she dreamed again. Of fire. Of her mother screaming. And of herself, standing in the center of the hall, holding the house in her hands as it burned. Day 6, she explored the cellars. She found a second staircase, descending deeper. Below the foundation, she found an altar. And on it, her name carved in stone. Beneath that, the 7th will awaken the 8th. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it. Day 7, the house was silent. Not just quiet-silent, no wind, no rain. Even the floorboards had stopped groaning. She dressed in black and entered the central hall. Mercer waited for her. In his hands, a box. He offered it to her without words. Inside, a key. And a feather. Half black, half white. She turned toward the staircase. The attic door had returned. This time it opened. Amelia stepped into the attic, her fingers tightening around the brass key Mercer had given her. Dust spiraled through the beam of her lantern as if awakened from a 100-year slumber. The floorboards groaned beneath her boots, their sound muted by the thick layer of decay carpeting every surface. A faint, almost metallic scent clung to the air-like rusted iron and wilted roses. The attic was larger than she remembered, deeper than any sane architect would have designed. Furniture draped in yellowing cloth stood like monuments to forgotten time. A bassinet, a writing desk, a settee with carved ravens along its wooden spine. None of it was hers. None of it had been part of her memory. But the mirror was. It stood at the far end of the attic, tall and crooked, its silver frame tarnished. She hadn't seen it since she was 9, since the day she swore someone else had waved back when she passed it. Now it shimmered faintly. Amelia approached, every step amplifying the whispering hush in her mind. She stopped in front of the glass. Her reflection was there. But not quite right. Her face stared back. But the eyes were someone else's. Then, it blinked. Amelia stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chest. She spun, but the room was empty. Cold wind pushed through a shattered pane, rattling the rafters. She looked back at the mirror. And normal. Almost. She backed away slowly. Her skin prickled with 1,000 tiny spikes. She descended the attic stairs in silence, not daring to look back until she closed the door behind her. The door clicked. Locked. Downstairs, the house had shifted. Not physically, but atmospherically. The air now hummed with anticipation, like static before a storm. The candles along the walls flickered without wind. From the grand piano in the music room, a single note echoed, though no one sat at the bench. Amelia returned to the study. Her father's journal lay open, pages freshly turned. Do not enter the red room. If you find it, you must not open the door. The red room? She'd never heard of it. She traced the lines below. The house adapts. The rooms rearrange. Memory is unreliable here. She closed the book and left it on the desk. A chill touched her shoulder as if someone had just walked past. When she turned, nothing was there. Not nothing. A doorway stood where a wall had been. The wallpaper was newer around the frame, dustless. The brass knob gleamed. She didn't remember this passage. Her map of the house imperfect as it was had no corridor here. And yet, it beckoned. The hall beyond was narrow and curved. The wallpaper was deep burgundy, embossed with vines and moths. The air was damp, like a greenhouse left too long sealed. At the end stood a door, painted red. The doorknob was cool against her skin. Her fingers trembled. Don't, she whispered to herself. But she turned it anyway. The red room was not red. Not exactly. The walls were the color of dried blood. Heavy velvet curtains hung over glassless windows. Candles floated midair, suspended in invisible hands. The floor was mosaic black tiles shaped into an eye, and in the center, a cradle. She stepped closer. Inside lay a doll. Its face was stitched with thread. No eyes. No mouth. But around its neck hung a locket, the same one her mother had worn. She reached for it. The room shrieked. Candles extinguished in a pulse of wind. The door slammed shut behind her. She spun. But there was no handle on this side. She was trapped. The doll sat up. Amelia, it said. Her scream didn't echo. The room swallowed it whole. When she came to, she was lying on the parlor floor. Mercer stood above her, holding a damp cloth. You opened the red room. She sat up slowly. What happened to me? The house warned you. She touched her temples. A thin line of blood traced her hairline. Why does it care? Mercer didn't answer. He helped her up and handed her something. The locket, unopened. She turned it over. Inside was a portrait of a young woman, her mother, and another face. Hers, but not as a baby. As she was now. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she read. Every journal. Every letter. Every marginalia scribbled by her father. Some pages referenced the binding a pact between the Northwood bloodline and something older, something buried beneath Blackstone Hall. One heir must carry the memory. One must forget. The balance preserves us. She flipped to the next page, but Amelia was never meant to inherit. Her breath caught. She shut the book. A knock echoed from the hallway. Slow, rhythmic. Not the front door. The attic. She rose, heart pounding, and walked toward the sound. At the base of the attic stairs, she stopped. The door was open again. She climbed. At the top, a single feather lay in the doorway. Black this time. The mirror stood just as before. But this time, her reflection was gone. Amelia stood frozen at the threshold of the attic, staring at the place where her reflection should have been. The mirror reflected the dusty beams, the crooked chair behind her, even the glint of the lantern flame. But not her. It was as though she'd ceased to exist in its world. She took a step back, heart thudding. The mirror's surface rippled. Then the glass cleared. A figure appeared. It looked like her, but older, paler, draped in shadow. The doppelganger smiled, and the smile was wrong, tilted, knowing. A mockery of familiarity, The lantern flickered. Amelia's hand shook. The figure raised one hand and pressed it to the inside of the glass. Words formed in the frost beneath its palm. "We remember what you forgot." Then the mirror shattered silently. No noise, no debris, just a spiderweb of cracks that spread and then vanished. The glass reset, and her reflection returned. Amelia ran. Back in her room, she locked the door and shoved the desk against it. The locket still sat on the nightstand, humming faintly with warmth. She hadn't opened it again, not since Mercer had handed it to her. Instead, she examined the journals once more. One page was folded sharply, like it had been returned to again and again. She peeled it open. The watcher in the glass is a memory the house cannot release. Bound by blood, sustained by fear. To banish it, know its name. But there was no name written. She paced the room until dawn. Day 3 of the inheritance trial began with a storm. Wind screamed through the shutters. The house groaned, beams creaking like they bore the weight of an entire past pressing down. Amelia ate breakfast in silence. Mercer said nothing, only poured her tea with shaky hands. "Who was she?" she asked suddenly. He paused. "Who?" "The woman in the mirror." Mercer's eyes darkened. "You don't want to know. I already do." He studied her a moment, then nodded toward the east wing. "Try the green salon." The green salon had been locked as long as Amelia could remember. A room her mother had called cursed. Now the door opened easily, revealing a space overgrown with ivy that had breached the walls and windows. Moss coated the floor. But at its center stood a painting covered in cloth. She pulled the cloth free. A portrait? Of a woman. Amelia's face. But again, not quite. The eyes were older, harder. The style was pre-Victorian. The brass plate at the bottom read, Lavinia Northwood, 1823, 1870. 1. The first witness. A crack split the frame. A whisper curled behind her ear. She never left. Amelia turned. No one. That evening, Amelia returned to the library. She dug through the shelves, pulling volumes at random. One crumbled in her hands, revealing a hidden alcove behind it. Inside, a leather-bound diary, wrapped in twine. She sliced the twine open. The ink inside was faint, but legible. Lavinia's sacrifice failed. The watcher survived. Each heir now bears the burden. Each must resist its call. But one failed. My sister. Eleanor. The rest of the page was smudged. Another entry. Eleanor welcomed it. She let it take her. She became its echo. Suddenly, Amelia understood. The face in the mirror. The doll. The whispers. This wasn't a haunting. It was inheritance. That night, she dreamt of fire again. But this time, she wasn't a child. She stood in the great hall, Lavinia beside her, Eleanor across the flames. Between them, the mirror. And within it, the house's true face. Blackstone Hall wasn't haunted. It was alive, feeding, and she was next. The storm had passed, but Blackstone Hall remained cloaked in shadows. Morning light trickled through the stained glass windows of the great hall, painting the wooden floors in fractured hues crimson, gold, and violet. Amelia had not slept. The fire in her room had burned low, and she hadn't dared close her eyes. What haunted her now was not merely a mirror or a name. It was history, her family's, hers, and something far older that pulsed in the bones of the estate itself. Downstairs, Mercer was waiting, standing beside a velvet-draped table. On it lay 3 objects: a rusted key, an envelope sealed in black wax, and a faded photograph of a woman holding an infant wrapped in lace. "Is that me?" Amelia asked, pointing to the photo. Mercer nodded. "Taken before the baptism. Before your mother refused the ritual." "What ritual?" He pushed the envelope toward her. "Your father's last instructions. They were to be given today, day 4. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. "Amelia." If you are reading this, then the house has begun its reckoning. There are places within Blackstone no map can chart, no memory retain. These are spaces where time folds, where names echo across generations. You must find the binding thread. It is the only way to sever our line from what Lavinia failed to contain. Below that, in faded ink, the chapel beneath the gardens. Midnight. She looked up. There's a chapel? Mercer didn't answer. He only handed her the key. The gardens behind Blackstone Hall had long been overtaken by nature. Once manicured hedges now reached skyward like skeletal fingers. The stone path wound toward a thicket of rose bushes, half dead, thorns heavy with dew. Amelia found the archway hidden behind ivy. A rusted gate creaked open, revealing crumbling steps descending into darkness. At midnight, she returned. Lantern in one hand, key in the other. She entered the chapel. The air inside was frozen, laced with the scent of old incense and mildew. Wooden pews lay scattered like bones. At the front, a stone altar rested beneath a shattered stained glass depiction of St. Michael defeating a serpent. But it wasn't the altar that drew her. It was the embroidery stretched across the back wall. A massive tapestry, woven in red thread, depicting generations of Northwoods, each marked by a name and symbol: Lavinia, Edward, Eleanor, and then Amelia. But unlike the others, her symbol bled beyond the frame, stitched into the edges of the cloth as though resisting the containment. She stepped closer. The thread glowed faintly. Alive, a voice echoed behind her. You shouldn't have come. She turned. Eleanor, not the child from the painting, not the woman from the journal, but a shape that flickered between both. Her eyes were mirrors, her hair flowed like shadow, and in her hands, she held a length of threaded, pulsing. You're the echo, Amelia said softly. I am what remains. They circled one another slowly. You let it in. Eleanor nodded. It promised remembrance. We were being forgotten. The house gave me eternity. At what cost? Eleanor raised the thread. At yours. Amelia ran. She burst into the library and slammed the door shut. Books rained from shelves as the house groaned in protest. The mirror above the fireplace cracked. She tore through the journals again, searching for Lavinia's final entry. At last, she found it. The binding thread must be burned by the air alone. But beware, it binds not only the curse but the bloodline. Severing it ends both. She gasped. To destroy the thread was to end the Northwood line, including herself. Behind her, the wind rose. The candles flickered out one by one, and in the mirror, Eleanor. Choose, she whispered. Amelia stood paralyzed before the cracked mirror, Eleanor's whisper still echoing in her ears. Choose, she had said. But how could she? Burning the binding thread would release the family from the grip of the entity the Watcher, but it would also extinguish the Northwood bloodline. Herself included, she was the last. She turned away from the mirror, shivering in the cold hush that had fallen across Blackstone Hall. The house was listening, watching, waiting. She found Mercer in the west corridor, near the old nursery door. He looked older now, more weathered, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights and secrets kept too long. You knew what the binding thread meant, she accused quietly. He didn't deny it. I served your father, your grandfather, and Lavinia before them, he said. Each tried to sever the bond. Each failed. Why didn't they destroy the thread? Because none of them were willing to die for it. She stepped closer. And you think I should? Mercer's voice softened. I think you might be the only one who can. The house began to change that evening. Doorways vanished, replaced by blank walls. Hallways stretched longer than physics should allow. Time bent. At one point, Amelia walked through the drawing room door and came out of the kitchen pantry. Reality no longer followed rules. By midnight, she stood again before the tapestry. The red thread shimmered like blood in firelight. This time, she brought the locket. Inside was the photograph. Her mother, smiling faintly, holding baby Amelia. And behind them, barely visible, the same mirror from the attic. The image pulsed. Suddenly, the air thickened. From the edge of the chapel, Eleanor emerged. "You returned," she said. "I need to understand," Amelia replied. "Why did you surrender?" Eleanor walked slowly, her feet never quite touching the floor. "I wanted to be remembered," she said. The world was moving on. The family was fading. The house offered memory, power, legacy. At the cost of everyone else? Legacy always costs. Amelia faced the tapestry. "If I burn this, what happens to you?" Eleanor blinked. "I am the echo. I will fade. And the watcher? It will scream. But it will die." Amelia took the flint from her coat pocket. Her hands shook. But before she struck it, a voice rang out. "Mercer." "Amelia, wait!" She turned. He stepped into the chapel, clutching a thick leather book. This might change everything. He opened the book, revealing a folded page Amelia hadn't seen before. Lavinia's hand. "One may carry, one may sever. Only a non-bloodline witness may channel the fire without death." Her breath caught. "What?" Mercer nodded. "You don't have to die. I can do it." "No," Eleanor whispered, her form trembling. "That breaks the pact. It must be blood." "But the text says—" Eleanor raised her hand. "He lies." Amelia looked between them. Mercer was shaking but resolute. "Let me do this." "No," Amelia whispered. "You served them all your life. You shouldn't pay the price they never would." She turned back to the thread. One spark. One strike. The flame caught slowly. At first a flicker. Then a hungry bloom. The tapestry screamed. Not a sound, but a pressure. Like air imploding. The faces on the cloth began to bleed away. Lavinia, Edward, Eleanor, and finally, Amelia's name began to fade. She fell to her knees. Fire raced up the wall, consuming history. Eleanor shrieked a sound that cracked the stone. "I will be remembered," she cried, voice fracturing. And then she was gone. Only ashes remained. When Amelia woke, it was morning. Birdsong drifted through the broken stained glass. The tapestry was gone, a scorched wall in its place. "Mercer knelt beside her." "You're alive," he said, voice hoarse with awe. She sat up slowly. Her body ached, but she breathed. The curse was broken, but so was the bloodline. She was no longer a Northwood. She was herself, free. 3 weeks later, the halls of Blackstone stood still. No wind moaned through the rafters. No mirrors whispered. The house had gone quiet, emptied of voices, emptied of memory. Amelia sat in the old study, a single suitcase at her feet. She had lived her entire life in the shadow of a name she hadn't chosen, tethered to rituals she never understood. Now, that name was Ash. She traced her fingers along the windowsill, where dust had begun to settle again. Outside, spring had returned. Wildflowers pressed against the broken garden walls. Bees hovered lazily in the sunlight. Blackstone no longer loomed. It simply stood an empty shell. She had packed only the essentials. Mercer, too, had made his peace. He would remain behind for a time, tending to the land until it could be sold. But his voice had grown lighter. With the curse broken, his servitude had ended. They shared tea one last time by the hearth. "You'll leave it behind, then?" he asked. Amelia nodded. "It's not mine anymore." She placed the locket on the table. He looked at her for a long time, then smiled. "You did what no one else could." End of lay. "I did what they wouldn't," she said quietly. She rose. The fire crackled in the hearth behind her, and for a moment, she saw her reflection in the window. Just her. Not Lavinia. Not Eleanor. Not a Northwood. Just Amelia. She drove west. No destination. Just motion. The car rattled on the old highway as dusk painted the landscape orange and gold. At a diner in Nebraska, a woman asked her name. She paused. then smiled. Amelia Quinn. New name. New life. She paid in cash, tipped heavily, and left before the sky darkened. Back at Blackstone, Mercer found the old nursery key in the study drawer. He opened the door and stood in silence. No crib, no laughter, just dust and faded wallpaper. Then he noticed something. A single red thread, dangling from the ceiling. He didn't touch it, only watched as it trembled once and went still. Far away, Amelia stopped for the night at a roadside inn. No whispers greeted her in the mirror. No strange dreams haunted her, just silence. But in her dreams, sometimes not often, she walked halls made of ash and time. Not trapped, just remembering. In the mirror of that dream stood her ancestors, not angry, not cursed, just watching and smiling because she had freed them and herself.